Welcome back to the Truth Factory. As a disclaimer, this video might get my car lit on fire, as acts of violence usually mysteriously surround pundits against the Antifa movement. I guess that's just what I deserve, though, for having contrasting opinions with a terrorist organization. Before I get into this, first a brief history of the Antifa movement. Anti-fascist, pro-communist regimes date back nearly 100 years and have roots that go directly back to Joseph Stalin and post-World War I Europe. From 1918 to the mid-1920s, several groups of German communists, backed by Stalinists in Russia, made a series of violent attempts to overthrow the newly formed Weimar Republic government in Germany. And then Antifa officially formed in the 1930s in Germany and was obviously crushed from 1933 to 1945 by actual Nazis. And in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, the anti-fascist movement came back into focus as a way for the leftist groups to fight right-wing sentiment, mostly in music and pop culture. You know, anarchy in the UK, rah rah rah. But what is Antifa today? Well, it's a group made up of mostly middle-class champagne socialists / communists / anarchists who banded together in a movement against the alt-right. And this came about, in the United States anyway, largely during Trump's rise to power. Because Antifa represents the continuation of the fight the man because I hate my dad mentality.
You're mad at your dad, mad at me, I forgive you.
It's a broadly anti-authoritarian movement that also relies heavily on social benefit. So it's some sort of anarchist-socialist fusion, even though socialist anarchists advocate for the conversion of present-day private property into social property for the commons, while retaining respect for personal property. I don't even know if that makes sense, but is that why they're lighting cars on fire? Because they respect others' personal property? They somehow coincidingly reject the establishment while simultaneously hold on to ultra-politically correct social justice warrior views. They will ask you for your pronouns, and then they will ask you if you are a Nazi.
You are all Nazis like Joseph Gerbils! This is Gerbils!
But because of their political correctness, they never go after real social injustices that are important, like regimes that support extreme versions of Sharia law where women and gays are actually oppressed by racist, homophobic, misogynistic regimes, because you know then they might be called pejoratives like Islamophobic. Luckily, there are no racist pejoratives if you target white people. So that is who they attack almost exclusively, white males, the only group left society deems appropriate to vilify.
You're fucking a white male!
Which also makes up the majority of Antifa. It's white on white hate. He's a Nazi.
Fucking Nazi-Schweine!
No, this is a Nazi. That is just a journalist.
Hold up.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do anything.
You fucking degenerate. If you want to go real Nazi hunting, everybody knows you have to go to their secret base in Antarctica. I will say I don't think it's entirely Antifa's fault. What it really boils down to is this social justice warrior mentality promoted by the public liberal school system and all of our society in the West for their whole lives, demonizing white men as the problem in history, indoctrinating these young white men to hate themselves.
Us white people, we have to erase it.
Based on the color of their skin and the history of their ancestors, and infuses them with white guilt and promotes them to rebel against their race to prove that they can take down the enemy from the inside by adopting these weird communist anarchy beliefs, while actually destroying everything, like literally everything, for no reason, and ironically becoming the bigger problem, which perpetuates the stereotypes that white people are the worst in a self-fulfilled prophecy. What is their endgame? Is their goal to create the conditions for communist takeover of the Democratic Party and eventually subversion of the constitutional republic? Well, probably, but it's not going to happen, guys. They try to justify their actions and pat themselves on the back when they burn down IKEAs thinking, I'm on the right side of history. Well, let me tell you something. You are only on the right side of history if you win. Otherwise, you're just a fucking criminal who burned down a fucking IKEA because you got a participation ribbon in school and you grew up thinking you were a special snowflake, and everyone who disagrees with you needs their cars bombed, you entitled pricks. Luckily, most of these guys are teenagers and university students ones who will grow out of this fad once they start paying taxes. Let's talk about the moral issues of Antifa. How can any member of Antifa watch these videos and still think they are the good guys? By calling themselves anti-fascists, they feel superior. They have the right to do whatever they seem fit for their cause or even just whims. They are communists trying to destroy fascism. It's the extreme right against the extreme left, and both are equally awful ideologies. Historically both terrible and always end in dictatorships. But when you break it down, it's actually just National Socialism versus globalist socialism. And they want us to forget that communists have slaughtered far more innocent lives than the Nazis ever did. I am anti-fascist and I'm anti-communist, and those things shouldn't have to be stated, as I'm also anti-puppy kicking and anti-child molestation, because those things are just inherently evil. And there are not a lot of real National Socialist white supremacists out there, and the ones who are have very little influence because everybody fucking hates Nazis. Yet the Antifa classifies anyone who swings right of center as a Nazi because that is how they get their power. Without fascists, there is no Antifa. But by calling yourself anti-fascist and calling Trump supporters Nazis before stabbing them with a flag, it vindicates your dissolute behavior and makes you think that you're a fucking hero. But using that logic, it's like starting a group called the Anti-Rape Patrol where you smash cars, and when someone questions like, what does that have to do with rape? You beat them up and you call them rapists. That's pretty fucked up, right? And people don't want to stand up to it, just as people don't want to stand up to any group the media and society deems unacceptable to criticize. They are bullies. It's just a display of power that's used to create fear of an anonymous mob that can act against you, and if you say anything against them, they will firebomb your car and poison your dog. In the United States, at least, most Antifa are trust fund kids who have never had to work for anything in their life, and they think Trump is a Nazi, and they think banning free speech is the answer. In Europe, however, they are actual communists and a paramilitary organization with a long history of using violence and terrorism with the intent to destroy governments, and they do not give a shit. They don't own property, they don't care about anyone but themselves. They say they fight for the working class, but yet they take revenge against them who have worked hard to have nice things. You know, people who pay taxes that make society work. And Antifa thinks society needs to be torn down so it can be rebuilt with their unemployment, uneducated, lazy, and utterly failed at the top regime. But don't worry, anarchy communism will fix everything somehow without anyone paying taxes or a government at all. What the fuck? This video right here is why anarchy doesn't work. With no law enforcement, it's utter chaos and destruction. Here they are looting. Looks like they're really taking down the Nazis, guys. You hate capitalism, but you love the fruits of capitalist labor, am I right? Do you think that you're really sticking it to the man? No, what you fucks are doing is disrupting the streets, the roads. You're making it slower for people to get home to their loved ones, slower for the police to arrive to crime scenes, slower for ambulances getting to the hospital saving lives, slower for workers getting to their job. Again, you haven't stuck it to the man. All you've done is fuck with the working class, destroyed their property, and interrupted their lives negatively. Just normal people trying to live an okay life and die. So leave them the fuck alone. Antifa wears masks because being anonymous makes you braver and protects your personal safety. And I get that. I use a cat as my avatar. But at the same time, you are committing mass crimes with the expectations that you are untouchable. And with the way our society is running right now, unfortunately, maybe you are. But let's go to our left-wing media for a comment. No? Nothing? Nothing really? Okay, great. Why is the media not covering this? Because they don't know how. These groups are made up of the extreme left, and they would never vilify their own people or people who oppose Trump, especially if that's happening in Europe. But here's the most insidious part of the whole thing. Guess who is funding Antifa? George Soros. I'm not fucking kidding. This globalist motherfucker, this real dirty sociopath who can and has destabilized entire governments by buying and selling its currency. His money has notoriously been linked to organizations that fund political protests and pay left-wing media to push specific narratives. Now, I'm not saying that everyone in these protests are getting paid, but the actual creation of it was funded directly or indirectly by Mr. Soros, who openly admits in funding regimes that promote his globalist ideals. He says he's focused for many years on Europe, and now he's focusing on the United States. He owns the Open Society Foundation that has been linked to funding many pro-left globalist groups like the American Association for Justice, the New America Foundation, the Migration Policy Institute, all of whom are advocates for the open borders policy. He's also given a lot of money to Media Matters and Correct the Record, which pays people to go onto social media platforms and argue with others who have right-wing beliefs. He was also one of Hillary Clinton's super PAC donors, giving her $7 million towards her election campaign. And he supported the group Refuse Fascism, which claimed to have started the Berkeley riots. And on Refuse Fascism's websites, it shows that they are sponsored by the American Association for Justice, which is funded by George Soros through the Open Society Foundation. George Soros also gave $33 million in grants to the Black Lives Matter movement through his Open Society Foundation, which in turn influenced President Obama's task force on the 21st century policing, consisting of 60 recommendations providing guidance on how to modify policing practices. It was used as a political strategy to pull on the heartstrings to gain more Democratic voters. And I'm not saying that Black lives don't matter or that real unpaid protesters were not involved. I'm saying it was funded and orchestrated by George Soros, just like Antifa is a symptom of George Soros. So you can ask yourself, when you see the destruction on this level with Antifa, what the real goal is, because trust me, it is not killing Nazis. In my opinion, it's about destabilizing countries to devalue their currency, and then he buys into them, as he has done things like this in the past and has made billions off doing so. The same reason why they promote open borders and mass immigration in stable societies that are difficult for central banks to control. And in my opinion, he's just a power-hungry sociopath.
You're a white man!
Maybe conspiracy theorists are right, they're all just satanic pedophiles, who knows? But things with Antifa are getting so much worse as the G20 summit brought thousands of Antifa members. And this is where they form the black bloc that acts as a symbiotic creature. It moves like fucking bacteria, destroying everything in its path. Hey guys, look how much good they're doing for everyone. This looks like a fucking third world country now, and all the refugees in Germany are going like, wow, yeah, I think we're gonna go back to Syria. Thanks, white people, you're fucked up. And then don't get me wrong, I agree with free speech and I agree with peaceful protests, but we can all agree that this is not peaceful. Antifa is a criminal organization at the least, and I believe it could be classified as a terrorist group. I'm sure there are some well-meaning hippies among them that you could sit down for a beer with and you could tell them why they're wrong. And I urge those people to shut it down and get out, because what's happening in Hamburg is not a protest. It's a riot, and it's a disgrace to the peaceful left. Unfortunately, the violent Antifa is much more predominant than the peaceful section, and because of that, I recommend staying clear of Antifa. And I understand how some people joined the original idea and might have thought that that was good, but now it's overrun by rioters, looters, and idiots hell-bent on destroying everything in their past, thinking that they won't have to suffer the consequence. So let's talk about solutions. How do you stop a group like this? Well, what should happen is that media should start reporting this in an honest light of what's actually happening. But that won't happen. If Trump supporters were doing this, there would be 24-hour coverage. But by not talking about this, you normalize this behavior and say this is okay. I want to hear your opinions and comments. Do you think that it's right to stoop to their level and fight back? In my opinion, that's what they've always wanted, a civil war between the right and left. And then the left can say, look, the right is violent, we need to take Trump down. Or do you use rational counter arguments like what I'm doing on the social media platform to raise awareness? Do you try to dox all of them so they can't hide behind their anonymous stupid balaclavas anymore? I think for the ones who are causing violent acts, then yes, that should happen, just as criminals deserve repercussions. Or do you think you should ignore them completely and give them absolutely no attention, as that is what they all want? Maybe if we just ignore them long enough, they'll all fuck off. Or do we make it illegal to wear masks in public and walk in large groups? Do you petition to have the government recognize them as a domestic terrorist group because they're using violence and threats of violence to bring about social and political change, the very definition of the word terrorism? Anyway, I've linked some petitions in my description if you're interested. Otherwise, I don't know, this whole thing's fucked. Have a good night. Meow.